Film Festival, and we are talking about the documentary feature Born in Chicago today. Here with me to talk about it are the directors, producers, and editors of the feature, Bob Sarles and John Anderson. Thank you both for joining me, and congratulations.
Thank you. Great to
Thanks
be
for
part of
having
your
me.
festival.
Yeah, it's so awesome to have Born in Chicago at this year's festival. I love blues, and this film is just so awesome, and I can't wait to talk to you guys about it. But before we get into everything, I'd love for one of you to tell everybody a little bit about the documentary.
John, why don't
Yeah,
you go?
I'll start. We started work on it in 2008. I'm based in Chicago. I started making a film, and at the heart of it was going to be a concert by Chicago Blues Reunion, a band on a label called Out the Box Records. And the band is comprised of Harvey Mandel and Nick Gravenitis and Corky Siegel and Barry Goldberg. And they're guys with a rich history and who are an important part of this story. So we set up to shoot that concert. It's available commercially now through Walmart.com. It's called Chicago Blues Reunion Live. And as we shot the interviews around that performance, it just became clear that this was a story that needed to be made into a documentary. So I started work on it with Barry Goldberg as my right-hand man, and we traveled the country collecting the interviews and putting the story together, and had a version of it cut in 2013. Then I needed to move away to work on a Paul Butterfield film and a Sam Lay film. And Bob, why don't you pick up the story from there?
Well, as often happens with film projects, they sometimes go through several hands before they're finished. And because of John's unavailability, the film went through several hands before it came to me. And often, as it happens with films, sometimes certain efforts, you have a point of diminishing returns. And unfortunately, what happened is the film, the cuts started not getting better. They started getting, I think, a little worse, or the film just sort of got stuck in the mud. It wasn't quite sure what it wanted to be at that point, regardless of the wealth of incredible material that was available for it. That happens sometimes in the editing process. So at some point, nearly, I think, a decade into the production of this film, the original producers, the money people behind the film, decided to hire myself and my filmmaking partner, Christina Keating, to see if we could take on the film and bring it to fruition. And eventually we worked out a deal with them, and we did come on. Joel Selvin was brought on to write a script that ostensibly turned into the blueprint for the film that Christina and I wound up finishing. And as John said, the genesis of the film was to be a concert film. But as John was saying, as they got into the story a little bit of the musicians that were in this concert, it started to evolve into something else because there was such a wealth of interview material. So by the time Christine and I inherited it, it was no longer a concert film, but it was more of a historical documentary. And in fact, that's what we wound up making, was a historical documentary that was about the passing of the torch from the originators of post-World War II electric blues in Chicago, ostensibly Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and their contemporaries, which was scores of other great artists, and how the blues torch got passed on to a new generation of mostly white middle-class kids who had migrated to Chicago in the early 60s in order to be closer to this music. And it's a fascinating story of cultural cross-pollination. And all of, a lot of John's DNA from the initial shoot is all in this film. I mean, the interviews were just so fruitful with great stories. And kind of what Joel Selvin and Christina and I brought to it was to create more of a story arc for this historical documentary that it wound up becoming.
And to be there, one of my thrills was to be there when Barry Goldberg, an acolyte of Hubert Sumlin and Otis Spann and all the Chicago guys, Barry, one of the tough kids like Bloomfield and Musselwhite who had the guts to go into these tough black clubs and listen to the blues. Sorry, what was I talking about? I was going on about, Barry.
A great memory.
Yes, a great memory for me was going to interview Hubert Sumlin with Barry. And when Hubert saw Barry walk in the room, Hubert, of course, was the guitar player with Wolf and was one of the people who took Bloomfield and Barry under his wings. When he saw Barry, he just gave him a hug and couldn't believe that they were together, and was reminded of all of these stories that went back 50 years. And that, is to me what making these movies is all about.
Absolutely. And it's so fascinating to hear how it started just as like a concert film and it just grew and adapted to something so extensive and historical. So props to you guys. I want to talk first about Dan Aykroyd. He was a narrator on this film and he's also an executive producer. So how did you guys get him on this project?
Well, when we finished our first cut of the final version of the film, I had Joel Selvin, who wrote the script, doing the narrating, and Joel gave it a very enthusiastic reading of the script, maybe a little bit too enthusiastic for my ear, but it was definitely something that we were able to edit with. But when we finished it, we realized that we're going to get a professional narrator in here, and with these documentary films, it's not a bad idea to get somebody who's got name recognition to be a narrator. It helps give the film a little bit of cash. So somebody had suggested, it might have been Tim Martin, one of the original executive producers, suggested Dan Aykroyd. And I kind of was against the idea, to tell you the truth, because I thought there would be too much association with his Blues Brothers character. And, the Blues Brothers, it says Blues and Blues Brothers. And I didn't want people to think that this was a campy treatment of this story, or that it was somehow associated with this was sort of what, nothing against the Blues Brothers band. They were a great band, but it wasn't what this story was about. And but then the more I thought of it, the more I realized that Dan Aykroyd really is a true blues fan, and he knows the stuff inside and out. And I only had one little fear, is that he would give us Elwood Blues. I didn't want the Blues Brother character as the voice. And so I remember having a conversation with his manager, and I said, just one thing, we don't want Danny to give us Elwood Blues. And his response was, oh, you can't afford Elwood Blues. So we got Danny straight, and he was great. He was real professional. I thought he gave it a great read, and really helps you pull you into the story.
Oh, it's cool how that happened. And John, I want to talk to you because you originally were directing this, and then you kind of had to like pass the torch in honor of the documentary. So what was that like, giving something that's so close to you over to Bob to finish directing it?
It was tough, of course, because we'd gotten a good review in Rolling Stone and in the New York Times, and we had had a successful screening at South by Southwest, but the film hadn't been sold, and that's really not my department. So I don't know what to compare it to, but you can imagine. My heart and soul is still in it, as Bob said, but the continuation of the line between myself and Bob was Barry Goldberg. Barry was involved all the way through, so he helped make sure that the original vibe remained intact, and Bob added his own depth to it.
Right. And similar question to you, Bob. What's it like receiving something that has already been established from someone else's directing?
In this case, it helped a lot that John and I were friends and colleagues, and had great mutual respect for each other's work. And so, for me, it was initially, an editing assignment. And then as we got into it, we kind of helped, reinvent it into a different way of telling the story. I can't understate the contribution that my filmmaking partner, Christina Keating, makes in terms of finding a lot of additional archival material. We inherited a film that had a fair amount of really good archival material, but we did another deep dive, and not just in terms of performance material that you see in the film, although there was a lot of great new performance material that we added to it. A lot of it had to do with more interstitial archival material that helps set up a place and time, and evokes the era, and is the connective tissue in terms of the narrative. So I can't understate the contribution that Christina made to this. But in terms of it being a project that originated with somebody else and then got finished by someone else, I couldn't imagine a better scenario in terms of the support that I got from John, because a lot of times I'd be looking for something, and we had lots of drives with many terabytes of material. This project had been worked on for over a decade, and John was always available with a phone call to find some stuff for us, and even at the end to jump in and do some additional editing at the very end when I needed some help. And so it was a very symbiotic relationship, I would have to say.
What so
Wow.
often keeps these films from getting made is the expense of the archival footage. And there's a handful of places that Bob and I both have contacts with, but with films like these, we call in every favor we have. I know Bob did, and a big help to this film was the film collection of Sam Lay, the drummer, who had carried an 8mm camera around with him from the early 60s till the late 70s. And
Wow.
he made that footage available to us. And without those sorts of helps, I don't know if the film ever would have gotten made.
That was my next question, was how were you guys able to find all this archival material? And I heard a recording from Muddy Waters, like some awesome historical clips that you have in this documentary. So
Well,
you would say it's just, yeah. Is there anything else to add on how you guys were
well,
able to
there's,
get all that?
I was just talking to Christine about this morning because it's a project that John and I are talking about working on. And I was able to find some working on together actually this time. And I actually was discovered some archival material, and Christine and I were remarking afterwards that so much of what we do is based on relationships. We found this new material because of a relationship with a particular vendor, and it's a relationship that's been built over 30 years. And John and I both have a lot of that. It's a very small niche of people that make these music documentaries, really. And we all kind of know each other, and we help each other out. And it's kind of like what Charlie says, when the waters rise, everybody goes up. And so I kind of feel like there's sort of that camaraderie among other documentary filmmakers and archivists, and we all know each other. We're all friends, and we're a community. And the one thing that's interesting is I've been doing this for these kind of music documentaries for about 30 years. And just when you think you've seen everything, like, how can you possibly be finding any more stuff? Somebody will tap a vein and find a new archive of somebody who had reels of tapes or films under their bed that have suddenly been discovered. And then suddenly there's all this great new material available. So it's always a constant process with archival films.
Always something new to discover. Wow. And I want to talk to you both about your amazing credits and career, because your bio is pretty intimidating, both of you. There's Grammy nominations, Emmy wins. It's really terrific. So my question for you is, what do you think contributed to that success? And I'll start off with you, John. I mean, how were you able to work so much over the years?
I love music. I think that's at the heart of it. I always loved music and filmmaking, and hope to find a life that would combine the two. So maybe I bring a certain musicality to my interviews, editing, whatever. It couldn't hurt, but couldn't help but rub off. So I think that's part of it. Plus, I have a healthy respect. All of the artists that I go after to work for are people that I love their work, and it shows, I think. And, I think you're more likely to open up to someone who understands what you're about and truly appreciates it. I think that you're going to give more to them, and that might have something to do with it.
Yeah, I would say so. Bob, how about you? What contributed to your
Well,
success?
not to dismiss your question at all. It's a legitimate question, but my answer is that it's no mean trick, really. I mean, John and I, we're not kids. We're getting a little long in the tooth. We've both been doing this for decades. And I think if you're any good at it and have any kind of track record, and you've been doing it for a certain amount of time, you're going to pick up some good credits, and you're going to win some awards. And we've both been fortunate in that regard.
Right. Well, my last question for you guys is, you both wore so many hats when it came to this documentary. Would you say any of those were more challenging than the other? Like, was there any big challenge for you? I know it was like years in the making, so I'm sure you ran into a lot of challenges, but what was the biggest challenge you would say?
Well, I can tell you the moment that my world stopped still was the time that when we were interviewing Steve Miller. And this is when I thought the film wasn't going to go forward. He had his makeup on. He was ready to go into the room, and the money guys were with me, walking down the hall, all starstruck with Steve Miller. And I said, well, you know how at the beginning of the film we have all these short bites about what Chicago was like in the mid-'60s? He said, yeah, I saw it. That's why I'm here. And I said, well, first thing I want to do is ask you something about that you could kind of contribute to. And he looked at me and he said, well, look, if you're going to be so picky, why don't you just ask and answer the question. And I kid you not, I went pale.
Yeah.
I remained on my feet. We sat him down in his chair. You know, the crew heard it. It was a terrible thing. The money guys were wondering, what the hell was wrong with me, as though I had done something wrong. And then Steve went on perfectly nicely, and he was a gentleman, and it was just like he needed that moment to kind of command the room. So we got through it.
Oh man, I just got a little a little like secondhand PTSD there as an interviewer. I don't know what I would do.
Yeah.
So I'm glad after that it all went
Yeah.
smooth.
Well, that stuff happens,
Yeah.
I
Bob,
would
what
say,
would you say?
I would say, the biggest challenge for me, and it was not insurmountable, but the hardest part for me was at a certain point we had a cut that we really liked, and this happens on just about any film project that anybody works on, and particularly in this genre. In the end, you have to adhere to a budget, or you have to get the film to be only incredibly expensive instead of insanely expensive. And so there was a lot of stuff that was in the film that I just loved. And, I had to lose a few battles in terms of keeping it in order to get the price down and start losing some clips. And one of those clips, and I sure hope I get to use it someday. I got to use it when years ago I was asked to put together a tribute film. I had an ongoing job for years producing the films that they show at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremonies for the artists when they got inducted. And I actually got the job to do the one for Paul Butterfield Blues Band. And I used this piece in that little tribute film, and I wanted to use it in this film too. And it's very expensive. Now, in that case, we had HBO paying for it. So even though it was very expensive, we had HBO with deep pockets, they paid for it. On this one, we didn't have such deep pockets. And what it was Paul Butterfield appearing on To Tell the Truth in 1966. And it's just, I don't know if that means anything to you. To Tell the Truth was a game show that has where people, they try to guess which of the three were the imposter. And Paul Butterfield was one of these. And this is such an iconographic a television show for anybody who grew up in the 60s. And to see Paul Butterfield on this show, and then he actually tried to play some music with the union musicians, the CBS studio musicians that were in the union there. They tried to play some blues, and it was quite funny, actually. But there were a few clips like that we had to sort of purge in order to make. Right. And so the difficult thing is, how do you lose these clips and yet still maintain the narrative? Because to me, ultimately, if it doesn't really affect the story, then maybe it can go. Because to me, it's very important that you stay close to the spine of the story from beginning to end and not go too far out on a limb, because I think then you start losing your audience's attention as to what the story was. So in the end, I don't mourn the loss of those clips, but at the time, that was a difficult thing to do, is to let go of them.
Yeah, I can imagine it was not an easy editing process for you both. So, I mean, congratulations again. We have to wrap this interview up, but I could talk to you guys all day about this. It's been such a pleasure to interview you both and to watch Born in Chicago. Let me tell everybody how they can see it screening at Garden State Film Festival. It will be Saturday, March 25th in the showroom, 3 to 5 p.m. So definitely check out this awesome documentary. Bob, John, thank you again so much and congratulations.
Thanks for having us.
You.
Bye.